It was supposed to be the night that marked the beginning of the rest of her life. Vanessa stood in the doorway of the hotel room, her white lace gown still fresh and untouched, the scent of lavender from her wedding bouquet lingering in the air. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl, the day she would marry the man of her dreams, the man who had captured her heart. But nothing about this night felt right. Everything had been perfect at the ceremony. The guests had showered them with love, the vows had been exchanged with heartfelt words, and the reception had been lively with dancing, laughter, and celebration. But now, as she stood on the threshold of the hotel suite, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She glanced over at her new husband, Greg, who had been strangely distant ever since they left the reception. Greg, with his tall frame and sharp jawline, had seemed perfect. They had met 2 years ago through mutual friends, and their whirlwind romance had felt like something out of a fairy tale. He had charmed her with his wit, captivated her with his gentle demeanor, and promised her a future full of happiness. There had been nothing unusual about their relationship, no sign that anything was amiss. Or so Vanessa thought. "Are you all right, honey?" Greg asked, his voice low and slightly strained. Vanessa smiled, trying to calm her own nerves. She had been waiting for this moment, for the two of them to be alone together. She walked toward him, ready to slip into the next chapter of their married life. But as she got closer, something felt off. She noticed the way his hands were trembling, how he kept averting his eyes. "Yeah, I'm just a little nervous," she replied softly, her heart racing. "I thought tonight would be perfect." Greg nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed distracted, almost anxious. "It will be, I promise." They exchanged a few awkward pleasantries before Greg excused himself to the bathroom. Vanessa, still wearing her wedding gown, sat on the bed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was wrong. When Greg returned, he was dressed in a simple white shirt and trousers, but his expression had changed. His face was pale, and his body language was stiff. "Are you sure you're okay?" Vanessa asked again, her voice trembling slightly. I need to tell you something," Greg said, his voice tight. I can't, I can't make love to you tonight." Vanessa blinked, her confusion deepening. "What? But Greg, we're married. We've been talking about this moment for months. It's our wedding night." I know, Greg muttered, his hands now trembling uncontrollably. "But it's not what you think. I have something to tell you." Vanessa frowned, feeling a lump form in her throat. She stood up and walked toward him, reaching for his hand. "What's wrong, Greg?" "We can talk about it." Greg swallowed hard. He took a deep breath, then muttered the words that would change everything. "I don't have a penis," he said quietly. Vanessa stared at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The silence between them felt suffocating, and she felt as though the world around her was collapsing. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I was born without one," Greg explained, his eyes avoiding hers. "I was born with a condition that prevented me from developing normally. I never wanted to tell you, but I thought you should know now." Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. All this time she had believed that Greg was the perfect man for her, someone who would make her feel loved, cherished, and complete. But now she was facing a truth she hadn't anticipated. Her mind raced, struggling to process the shock. Greg was still standing in front of her, his body rigid, waiting for her reaction. But all she could do was stare, unable to comprehend the enormity of what he had just confessed. Hours later, Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her wedding night had been nothing like she had imagined. The excitement and joy had quickly turned to confusion and heartbreak. She had married a man she thought she knew, only to discover that everything she had believed about him was a lie. She didn't know what to feel: anger, betrayal, confusion. She had trusted him, loved him, and now she felt like a fool. What was she supposed to do now? What was she supposed to think about the man who had been hiding this from her all along? As the night wore on, Vanessa's mind remained clouded, her thoughts spiraling in every direction. She had never imagined that something like this could happen. She had never thought that her wedding night would end like this, full of unanswered questions and doubts. Next morning, the once happy, excited atmosphere had been replaced with tension and unease. Vanessa sat in the corner of the room, her face pale and her eyes red from a sleepless night. Greg was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shoulders hunched in shame. "I should have told you earlier," Greg said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you." Vanessa's heart ached as she stared at him. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to feel. The shock of his revelation was too much to process. "I don't know what to do now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know who you are anymore." Greg's face twisted in pain. "I know I've messed up, but I love you, Vanessa. I always have. I just didn't know how to tell you the truth." Vanessa's tears fell freely now, the weight of her disappointment and confusion too heavy to bear. She had trusted him, and now it felt like everything she had known about their relationship had been a lie. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. The hours dragged on in a haze of confusion, anger, and disbelief. She felt the weight of Greg's secret pressed down on her chest, suffocating her in the silence of the hotel room. She had thought her wedding night would be filled with love, joy, and the start of a lifelong journey with the man she'd married. Instead, she was left questioning everything. The morning after the shocking revelation, Vanessa's eyes were red from crying, and she hadn't eaten a bite of the breakfast Greg had ordered in. He had tried to be understanding, but she could see the desperation in his eyes. He wanted her to forgive him, to accept him, to look past what he had kept hidden, but she wasn't sure if she could. As she sat across from him at the small breakfast table, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, she tried to gather her thoughts. Every time she opened her mouth to speak, the words caught in her throat. What was there to say? What could she say to the man who had kept such a monumental part of himself from her for so long? "I never meant for you to find out this way," Greg said quietly, breaking the silence between them. His voice trembled slightly, his shoulders slumped as though the weight of the confession was bearing down on him. Vanessa felt her emotions stirring inside her, but she didn't trust herself to speak yet. She wanted answers, real answers. Why had he kept this from her? How could he have lied to her all this time? "Why didn't you tell me?" Vanessa finally asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me before we got married?" Greg looked down at the table, his hands clasped in front of him. "I didn't want to lose you," he admitted softly. I thought, I thought you might leave me if you knew. I was afraid that if you found out, it would be the end. I wanted you to love me for who I am, but I was too scared to show you the truth." Vanessa could feel the tears rising again, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough. Instead, she clenched her fists, the pain of his betrayal gnawing at her insides. "Do you realize what you've done, Greg?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You've taken away my trust. You've taken away my security. Everything I thought I knew about you is shattered." Greg's face twisted in pain, and he reached out toward her. "Vanessa, please, don't hate me. I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear. I love you." Vanessa pulled her chair back, her body stiffening with the need to distance herself. She couldn't look at him anymore. Not like this. The man she had married no longer felt like the person she had come to trust. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I don't know if I can stay with you. I don't know if I can trust you again." Greg's face crumpled as though he had just been punched in the gut. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping across the floor with a loud screech. He walked over to her and dropped to his knees. "I'll do anything, Vanessa," he said, his voice breaking. "Anything to make this right. I just, please don't leave me." Vanessa closed her eyes, feeling a sick, gnawing feeling in her stomach. She had never imagined her marriage would start like this. A part of her wanted to comfort him, wanted to believe that their love could survive this terrible blow. But the other part of her, her rational side, knew that this was something she couldn't just brush off. She couldn't pretend that everything was fine, not when her entire world had just been turned upside down. "I need some time," Vanessa said, her voice cold and distant now. "I need to think. I can't make any decisions right now." Greg nodded miserably, standing up and backing away. He knew this wasn't the reaction he had hoped for, but he understood. He had broken something between them, something important, something that might never be fixed. Vanessa walked over to the window, her hands pressed against the cool glass as she stared out at the city skyline. She felt a deep emptiness inside her, a gaping hole where her dreams had once been. Everything she had imagined for her future, the family they would build, the love they would share, was now uncertain. She didn't know what the next steps were, but she knew she couldn't just sweep this under the rug. Greg remained silent, standing a few feet behind her. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix what he had broken. He had kept this secret for so long, and now that the truth was out, he realized the damage it had caused. "I don't know if we can move past this, Greg," Vanessa whispered, almost to herself. "I don't know if I can trust you again." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy between them. Vanessa knew she couldn't make any rash decisions. She needed time. Time to think about what had happened. Time to process everything. As she stared out the window, her heart aching, Vanessa realized that her marriage was no longer what she had thought it was. She had to face the hard truth that love, trust, and honesty were all fragile things. Once broken, they might never be the same again. Days passed after Vanessa's confrontation with Greg. The pain of the discovery had subsided only to be replaced with an unsettling uncertainty. Vanessa was torn between her emotions, her loyalty to a man she thought she knew, and the betrayal that weighed heavily on her heart. It had been 3 days since the wedding night. Greg had tried to reach her, sending countless texts, leaving messages, and even calling her at odd hours. But Vanessa remained silent, unsure of what to say, unsure of what she even wanted. The questions swirled in her mind endlessly. Why hadn't Greg told her before the wedding? What did this mean for their future? But it wasn't until she received an unexpected phone call that everything took a sharp turn. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, and after a moment's hesitation, Vanessa answered. "This is Detective Rachel Hayes," came the firm, authoritative voice from the other end. "I'm handling the investigation into the situation involving your husband, Greg Tanner." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what the detective meant by situation, but she could already feel her nerves tightening. The last few days had been a blur, and the idea of someone else stepping in made her uneasy. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what you're referring to," Vanessa replied cautiously. "I understand this might be a shock, but there have been some new developments regarding Greg that we need to discuss. We'd like to meet with you," Detective Hayes explained. "Can you come to the station? It's important." The mention of new developments sent a chill down Vanessa's spine. She had no clue what the detective was talking about. Greg's secret was one thing, but now there seemed to be something bigger at play. Vanessa agreed to meet with the detective, her curiosity getting the better of her, despite the growing sense of dread. The following afternoon, she found herself sitting across from Detective Rachel Hayes in a dimly lit interrogation room at the police station. The detective was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put Vanessa on edge. Detective Hayes wasted no time getting to the point. "Vanessa, I understand you've recently been married to Greg Tanner. What can you tell me about your relationship?" Vanessa was taken aback by the question. I don't know. I thought everything was fine until a few nights ago." Hayes nodded, her expression unreadable. "And what happened a few nights ago?" Vanessa hesitated, unsure of how much she should reveal. "I found out something about my husband," she said, her voice shaking. Something I didn't expect." "Can you be more specific?" Hayes prompted. Vanessa felt her stomach twist. "I found out that Greg doesn't have a penis. He has some sort of condition. He's been hiding it from me." Detective Hayes didn't react, but Vanessa noticed the slight narrowing of her eyes. She could sense the investigator's mind working behind her calm demeanor. "I see," Hayes said after a moment, her voice smooth. "And did your husband ever give you any explanations as to why he kept this from you?" "He said he was afraid I would leave him," Vanessa responded. "But I don't know what to think anymore. It feels like a betrayal. I just don't understand why he didn't tell me before we got married." Detective Hayes leaned forward slightly, her pen tapping on her notepad. "Vanessa, I'm sure this is difficult for you, but I need to ask you something important. Has anything about your husband's past seemed unusual? Did he ever mention having enemies or anyone who might want to harm him? Vanessa blinked, taken aback by the question. What do you mean by harm? Greg Tanner is under investigation for a separate matter, Hayes explained, her tone unwavering. We've come to learn that he may be involved in a larger situation, something related to a previous relationship and some unsavory dealings. This isn't just about what happened between you two. Vanessa felt a sudden jolt of fear. What are you saying? Are you accusing Greg of something? I'm not accusing him of anything yet, Detective Hayes said, but there are some things we need to clear up, and you might be more involved in this than you realize. Vanessa's mind raced. She had no idea what the detective meant, but it was clear that Greg was hiding something far deeper than the secret he had kept from her. Was he involved in criminal activities? Had he lied to her in ways she couldn't even imagine? Is he in trouble? Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's what we're trying to find out, Hayes replied. We believe someone might be trying to use Greg's past against him, and it could have something to do with the people he's crossed in the past. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. She had no idea what kind of man she had married, but now it seemed like her entire world had been built on a web of lies. The man who had promised to love her had hidden so much. So many secrets, so many unknowns. She couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was unfolding, and that Greg was at the center of it all. Detective Hayes stood up, her voice cold as she finished. We'll need you to stay in contact with us, Vanessa. If you remember anything else, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. And for your safety, I suggest you avoid seeing Greg for now, until we can determine what's going on. As Vanessa left the station, she felt a wave of dread wash over her. The man she had married was a stranger, and whatever truths lay beneath the surface were far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Days passed, and Vanessa found herself stuck in a tangled web of emotions. She couldn't stop thinking about Detective Hayes's words. Greg, her husband, was hiding something much larger than she had ever anticipated. But even with the police investigation underway, Vanessa couldn't shake the need for answers. She had to know what her husband was really involved in, and why he had kept this secret from her. The detective had made it clear. Greg's past was far more complicated than she could imagine. As the investigation progressed, Vanessa started receiving odd calls and messages. They weren't from Greg, who had been eerily silent since the police visit. Instead, the messages were cryptic, almost threatening, from unknown numbers. One simply read, "Stay away from him if you know what's good for you." Another, more chilling one warned, "You have no idea what you're really dealing with." Vanessa ignored the fear gnawing at her and decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew she had to confront Greg, to demand answers from him, but she also needed to understand what was going on. If Greg was connected to something sinister, if he was involved in something dangerous, she didn't want to be left in the dark any longer. On a quiet evening, when Vanessa knew Greg would be at their home, she decided to face him. She walked up to the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was silent, the air thick with tension. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Greg opened the door, his face pale and drawn, eyes heavy with guilt. "Vanessa," he said, his voice almost a whisper. He looked like a man who had already lost everything. "I need answers," Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I need you to tell me the truth, Greg. What is all of this about? Why didn't you tell me about your condition before we got married? What are you hiding from me?" Greg's expression faltered, and for a moment, it seemed like he was going to shut the door and end the conversation. But then he sighed and stepped back, allowing Vanessa to enter. "I never wanted you to know," he began, his voice low. "I thought I could protect you from the truth, but I failed you, and now it's too late." Vanessa crossed her arms, anger and confusion bubbling inside her. "Protect me? You've been lying to me, Greg. How is this supposed to protect me?" Greg sat down on the couch, rubbing his hands together nervously. "There's something you don't understand, Vanessa. Something that goes back years. I didn't just keep my condition from you. There are people after me. They've been after me for a long time." Vanessa frowned, sitting down across from him. What are you talking about? Who's after you? Greg looked around, his eyes darting as if he feared being watched. I'm mixed up in something dangerous. It's not just about my condition. I've been involved with the wrong people, people who don't take kindly to betrayal, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want from me. Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. What are they after? And why didn't you tell me? I didn't tell you because I thought I could protect you from it all, Greg said, his voice barely audible. But it's too late now. They know about you, and they'll hurt you if they think you're involved in this. They want me, Vanessa. They always have. Vanessa's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what Greg was saying. Who are these people, Greg? What have you done? Greg shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. I can't explain everything right now, but what I can tell you is that I'm not the man you think I am. I'm in debt to some dangerous people, and I made a choice that led us here. If you stay with me, Vanessa, it'll only get worse. These people won't stop until they get what they want from me. Vanessa stood up, her emotions a whirlwind. And what exactly do they want from you? Is it money? What is it? Greg's silence was deafening, and in that moment, Vanessa realized that Greg was more entangled in this mess than she had ever imagined. His reluctance to give her a straight answer only made her more determined to uncover the truth. I don't know what to believe anymore, Greg, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. I thought you were the man I married, but now everything feels like a lie. What am I supposed to do now? Just walk away? Greg's eyes welled with tears, his voice shaky. I never wanted any of this. I wanted a normal life with you, but it's too late now. I've made too many mistakes. Vanessa felt her heart breaking. She loved Greg, despite everything that had happened, despite the lies, despite the betrayal. But she couldn't ignore the danger that now loomed over them. She couldn't pretend everything was fine when she had no idea who was really pulling the strings. I need to know more, Greg, she said firmly. I need to know everything. If we're going to get through this, I can't do it blindfolded. Greg swallowed hard and looked up at her, his eyes filled with fear. You need to stay away from this, Vanessa. If you want to survive, you need to walk away now. Vanessa stood in the middle of the room, torn between her love for Greg and the dangerous reality he had just unveiled. The man she had married was not who she thought he was. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer just dealing with a husband's secret. She was caught in something much darker, much more deadly. The investigation was only beginning, but the truth had already started to unravel. Vanessa's world had been turned upside down. What began as a fairy tale wedding had quickly become a nightmare. The man she thought she knew, the man she had promised to spend her life with, was hiding a past filled with danger, secrets, and lies. But despite the uncertainty, Vanessa couldn't walk away. She had to know the truth. If she stayed in the dark any longer, she feared it would cost her everything. The next morning, Detective Hayes arrived at the house. His face was grave, as usual, but there was an edge to his demeanor. He seemed more determined now, as if something in the case had clicked. Vanessa hadn't been expecting his visit, but she welcomed it nonetheless. She needed answers, and Hayes was her only hope. I've been digging into your husband's past, Mrs. Wright, Hayes said, his tone businesslike, but with an undercurrent of caution. There's a lot more to this than you know. Vanessa nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I'm listening. The detective pulled out a manila folder from his bag and placed it on the table. He slid it toward her, and Vanessa's hand trembled as she opened it. Inside there were photographs, documents, and notes. It was a grim collection of details that painted a dark picture of Greg's past. This is from a series of investigations we've been tracking for a while now. Your husband, Greg Wright, has been involved with a criminal network, one that deals in money laundering and illegal arms trade, Hayes explained, his voice steady but cold. Vanessa felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What are you talking about? Greg would never... He didn't start out that way, Hayes interrupted gently. But people like this, they don't give you a choice. They find you when you're weak, when you're desperate. I'm afraid your husband made some dangerous choices before he met you. Vanessa could barely breathe. She stared at the folder, at the photographs of Greg with men she didn't recognize. There were notes detailing his involvement with shady businesses, and there was even mention of his debt to a powerful cartel. It was a stark contrast to the Greg she had married, the sweet, gentle man who had promised to love her forever. "Who are these people?" Vanessa asked, her voice shaky. She couldn't understand how this could have happened. How had Greg gotten mixed up with criminals? And why hadn't he told her? "They're the kind of people who don't leave you alone. If you owe them money or you've crossed them in some way, they'll find a way to make you pay. That's where this condition of his comes in. It's not just a medical issue, Vanessa. It's a manipulation tactic. He's been under their control for years." Vanessa sat down heavily in the chair, her mind spinning. She had heard Greg mention a debt, but she never imagined it was anything like this. The condition, the secrecy, it all made sense now, but it also felt like a lie she had been living in for months. "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" Vanessa whispered. "Why didn't he warn me?" Because they threatened him, and because, just like many people in his position, he thought he could keep it all hidden. "But the debt has grown, Vanessa, and it's coming back to haunt him," Hayes explained, his eyes meeting hers. "You're not just a victim of a bad marriage. You're in danger now because of the choices he made." Vanessa felt the sting of betrayal deep in her chest. She had trusted Greg. They had built a life together, and now it seemed like none of it was real. She wanted to scream, to break down, but she held herself together. She had no time for tears. "What can we do?" Vanessa asked, her voice stronger than she felt. "How do we stop this?" Hayes hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "That's the thing. You can't stop it. Not without getting caught in the crossfire. The people Greg's involved with, they won't let him go so easily, and they definitely won't let you walk away without consequences." Vanessa's heart raced. "What do you mean? What happens next? The cartel, the people Greg owes, they'll come for him. They'll come for you too if they think you're involved. You're in deeper than you realize, Mrs. Wright. The only way to protect yourself now is to get out, leave town, disappear. They have eyes everywhere, and I'm afraid that if you stay, they'll make sure you regret it." The finality of his words hit Vanessa like a freight train. Leave everything behind? Run for her life? It seemed impossible. She had a family, a life, and friends here. Could she really just walk away from it all? But Hayes' stern expression told her that there was no other choice. If she stayed, she would be in grave danger. If Greg didn't get himself out of this mess, she would pay the price too. "I'll get you a new identity, a safe house," Hayes continued, "but you'll have to leave quickly, and you'll need to leave Greg behind." "Leave Greg?" Vanessa said, her voice barely a whisper. "How could I? I still love him. Love him or not, he's not the man you thought he was, and he's already made a deal with the devil. You can't save him, Mrs. Wright. You need to save yourself." Vanessa's mind was in turmoil. She had never imagined that her life would come to this. She had thought the hardest part was dealing with Greg's condition, with their troubled marriage. But now she realized that the real danger had always been lurking in the shadows. And if she didn't act fast, she would become just another casualty of the chaos Greg had brought into their lives. The detective stood up, closing the folder. "You don't have much time. Think about it, Mrs. Wright. You need to decide." Now, as Hayes left the room, Vanessa felt like she was drowning in uncertainty. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. The life she thought she knew was over. She had no choice but to move forward, even if it meant leaving behind everything, and everyone she had ever known. Vanessa couldn't sleep that night. The silence of her home was deafening, and every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent shivers down her spine. The weight of the decision she had to make hung heavy in the air. Detective Hayes's words echoed in her mind. "You need to leave. Leave him behind." But how could she? How could she just walk away from the man she had vowed to love, honor, and cherish? He was still her husband, even though everything else was falling apart around them. The thought of abandoning him, of leaving behind everything she had worked so hard to build, felt like an impossible betrayal. She turned over in bed, glancing at the empty side where Greg usually slept. It had only been one night since their wedding, and already their world had collapsed. How had it all gone so wrong? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. She grabbed it from the nightstand, hoping it was Hayes with some new information. But when she saw the caller ID, her heart skipped a beat. It was Greg. She hadn't spoken to him since that disastrous night, and even now the mere thought of hearing his voice made her stomach churn with a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. But she couldn't avoid him forever. She had to face him, no matter how painful it would be. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa answered the call. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Greg sounded hesitant, almost like he wasn't sure how to begin. Vanessa, I know we need to talk. I know I've lied to you, and I know I've hurt you in ways I can never make up for, he said, his voice trembling. But please just hear me out. I need you to understand. Vanessa's heart ached as she listened to the man she had once trusted so completely. But his words did little to ease her pain. She had already heard the excuses, the promises. Now she needed the truth. The full, unvarnished truth. She needed to know why he had kept so much from her, why he had dragged her into a web of lies. Greg, I don't know if I can forgive you. You've kept so much from me. You've put me in danger. I don't even know who you are anymore, Vanessa said, trying to keep her voice steady. I know. But I'm not the man I was back then, Greg pleaded. I thought I could keep everything from you. I didn't want you to get hurt. I didn't want you to know the things I've done, the people I've been involved with. But I'm asking for one chance. Just one. Please, Vanessa, we can fix this together. Vanessa felt tears welling up in her eyes. Part of her still wanted to believe him, still wanted to think that the man she had married was worthy of her trust. But another part of her, the part that Detective Hayes had awakened, knew that Greg's promises were empty. The deeper she dug, the darker his secrets seemed to become. You don't get it, Greg. I'm not safe. Not anymore. I can't stay with you. I can't put myself in that kind of danger. I have to go, she said, her voice breaking. I need to protect myself. There was a long silence. Vanessa could hear Greg's sharp intake of breath, as though he was trying to process her words. When he spoke again, his voice was low and full of anger. Do you really think you can just walk away from this? You think they'll let you go that easily? He spat. I told you, I've made deals with people who don't forgive. You're in this now, whether you like it or not. Vanessa felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had always known that Greg had secrets, but now the reality of the danger she was in hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just married to a man with a past. She was entangled in something far darker and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Greg, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I'm done, she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I'm leaving. Before he could respond, Vanessa hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking as she put the device down. She had made up her mind. There was no turning back now. Vanessa knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't wait for Greg to make good on his threats. The danger was real, and it was closing in on her. She had to leave. But where could she go? She couldn't just vanish into thin air. She needed help, and Detective Hayes was her only option. She grabbed her phone again and sent Hayes a quick message. I'm ready. I need to leave. Can you help me get out of here? Minutes later, Hayes called her back. I've got a plan, he said, his voice calm but urgent. Pack what you can and be ready to leave tonight. I'll send someone to meet you at the safe house. It's the only way to keep you safe. Vanessa felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. For the first time since her wedding night, she felt like she had control over her fate. But there was still one lingering thought in her mind. Would she ever be able to escape the shadow of the man she had married? Would the dangers of his past ever truly let her go? Vanessa didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside, seemed to magnify the weight of the decision she had made. She had to leave. It was the only way forward. As she packed her belongings into a suitcase, just the essentials, her mind raced with 1,000 questions. Was she truly safe? Was there more to Greg's secret life than she had been told? And most haunting of all, what would happen if she never saw him again? She looked around the house one last time, memories of their wedding day swirling in her mind. They had promised each other forever. How had everything gone so horribly wrong? The man she had married, the man she had trusted, had led her into a world she could never have imagined. Vanessa closed the suitcase and moved toward the front door. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the doorknob. It was time. There was no going back. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt a sense of urgency take over. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. Detective Hayes had given her the address of the safe house, a place where she would be hidden away until things settled down. She had to get there before Greg found out she was gone. The thought of him hunting her down made her stomach twist with anxiety, but she couldn't afford to let fear control her anymore. She drove through the quiet streets, the headlights of her car cutting through the darkness. Vanessa could feel the eyes of the night on her, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her as she sped toward the safe house. There were so many unanswered questions swirling in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly understand the full extent of what had happened. When she arrived at the safe house, Detective Hayes was already there, waiting for her in the shadows. His face was stern, but there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes as he approached her car. "Vanessa," he said softly, his voice tinged with concern, "you made the right choice. You're safe here." She nodded, the relief of reaching the safe house making her feel momentarily lighter, but the questions continued to gnaw at her. "Hayes," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to know. Greg, what exactly has he been involved in? Why did he do this to me? Was it all just for his secrets, or was there something more? I can't stop wondering if I'll ever truly understand." Detective Hayes hesitated, his gaze shifting toward the empty street. After a long pause, he spoke again, his tone low and serious. "The truth is, Greg's life isn't what you think it is. He's been involved in organized crime for years. Money laundering, illegal trade, you name it. But what's more troubling is that he's been working with people who are capable of anything to keep their operations under wraps." Vanessa felt her heart drop into her stomach. She had known Greg wasn't being truthful with her, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "He kept you in the dark because he didn't want you to know what kind of world he was living in," Hayes continued. "But now you're a part of it, whether you like it or not. That's why he's so desperate to get you back. It's not just about love, it's about control. He doesn't want to lose you because you're tied to him, and if you leave, it might expose him in ways he can't recover from." A cold shiver ran down Vanessa's spine. She had thought Greg was just hiding his past, but this was something far more sinister. She felt sick to her stomach, as though the entire foundation of her life had been built on lies. "But why didn't he tell me?" Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why marry me at all if he knew he was living such a dangerous life?" Hayes paused before answering. "That's the thing about people like Greg. They think they can control everything. They think they can hide their true selves behind a mask of normalcy. And you were part of that mask. He thought he could keep his two worlds separate, but when you found out the truth, it all fell apart." Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to absorb everything Hayes had just revealed. Her world, her marriage, everything she thought she knew had been shattered in a matter of days. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I just want to be free. I don't want to live in fear anymore." "You are free now," Hayes assured her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "But it's not over. You need to stay strong, stay smart. Greg isn't going to give up easily. He'll be looking for you." Vanessa nodded, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. She had to stay alert, stay hidden. Her life had changed forever, and she wasn't sure what the future held. "I'll be here to help you every step of the way," Hayes continued. "But the road ahead is going to be difficult. We need to make sure Greg doesn't come looking for you. You have to stay off the radar." Vanessa felt a sense of resolve fill her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. The life she had planned with Greg was gone, but she could still fight for her freedom. She could still survive. As Hayes led her into the safe house, she took one last look at the car she had just driven. The familiar, mundane world she had known was gone, but she wasn't helpless anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, and as long as she had breath in her body, she would fight to stay free.